So this week the topic is elasticity, texture and mouthfeel elasticity. And someone was asking me what elasticity is, and elasticity is the fact that like your hand is squishy and the floor is not. That's elasticity. And you can't eat the floor because it's hard, but your hand, at least, I don't know. Pasta though, you can eat pasta. Last week in the Harvard College class, we had our first lab, and the lab actually, it turns out, was about pasta. The students made pasta puttanesca, which is a wonderful recipe that was introduced in this wonderful book, The Series of Unfortunate Events. And the students cooked pasta in various different ways. So for example, one way to cook pasta is to boil the water and pour the pasta in. Another way to cook pasta is to not boil the water and put the pasta in. And there are lots of questions you could ask, like, for example, does it matter if you boil the water first before you put the pasta in? Actually, one thing that I think Mark will talk about is, suppose you try to cook your pasta in the microwave. Will that work? How many of you cook pasta in the microwave? None of you, see? So why is that? Is it because none of us know about this wonderful secret of microwaves, or is it that you actually can't cook pasta in the microwave? So you see, there are lots of questions that you can ask about these recipes. Now, this lab was inspired. Our lab was inspired by a wonderful article that Harold McGee wrote in the New York Times about 5 years ago, in which he asked, how much water does it really take to make pasta? Because, these pasta boxes, like, for example, this one. Look at this. This says, where's the box? It says, use 6 quarts of water per 1 pound of pasta. That's a lot of water. Have you noticed? Do you really need that much water? He says, no. Then why did the box tell you to put that much water in? So anyway, that's what Harold talks about. And he actually estimates the energy savings that would take in the United States if you were to just use the right amount of water, for crying out loud, which is an interesting thing. Anyway, last year in the Harvard X class, we did a little experiment, actually, because Harold also talks in this article about how you don't even need to boil the water. How many of you boil the water before you make pasta? Yeah. Does anyone not? Okay. So the question is, why do you do that? Just because the box said? So we did this little experiment, and I'm going to just show you a little bit of the data. This is data that was taken off early on, right after we put it up in the Harvard X class. We asked people to please make pasta both ways and judge whether or not they thought it tasted the same, just to judge. And we had a poll. And so by that point, we had 395 responses, and basically 50% of the people said that it didn't matter which way you cooked it. That is, if you boiled the water first or you didn't. So you should all go home and try to make pasta without boiling the water first, and also stop taking the recipe so seriously. Is that a bad thing to say?
Yes. No, that's right.
Is that bad? That's okay?
That's right.
Okay, I'm always embarrassed when I say things like this in front of people who know what they're doing, because maybe you should take them seriously. Okay, so now elasticity, I just have a couple more things to say, and then I'll turn it over to Mark. Now, elasticity is of central importance to cooking, and we were really very excited when Mark agreed to come and be the chef for this week, both because the food truck is the coolest thing ever, and because gluten-free pasta, that is making pasta, or actually any baked good without gluten, really gets at the core of the issue in thinking about elasticity in cooking. And that's because, as we will tell you, and as Mark will tell you, gluten is a protein, or really 2 proteins, which are the core elastic element in making baked goods and pasta. And when you ask yourself, how do I recreate a dish without using it, then you've basically thrown it all out of the window, and you have to really figure out what you're doing when you put it together, which is the intellectual issue that I think underlies this lecture. Yes? Well,
yes.
We'll see. I haven't heard the lecture.
Partially.
Okay. So, but anyway, but the thing is that controlling elasticity is central to all of cooking. And just to throw up some more examples for you to think about, you all know that some of you like steak very well done, and some of you like it not so well done. And what many of you might know is what people call the thumb test, which is that if you're cooking a steak and you want to find out how well done it is, what you do is you just push on it. And if it's really squishy, then it's not very well done. And if it's not very squishy, then it is well done. Well, that's a measurement that you're making with your hand of the elasticity of the steak, which you're doing, which changes as a function of the temperature inside of the steak, because there are transitions in the proteins in the steak that cause it to firm up. So the same issue occurs with cheeses. And so the question is how to quantify that. And this, as you know, for better or for worse, I'm a scientist, Pia is a scientist, we're scientists, and so we basically ruin everything Well, you don't ruin everything, but I ruin everything. And so, instead of this beautiful cheese, and you can squish on the cheese or you can squish on the steak, we think about springs. And the thing is, if you squish on the spring, it's the same thing. I mean, you have to push, on it, and it reacts back. And how many of you have taken a physics class? And remember, they told you about these things, and you thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to you. But the thing is that really, if you think about tofu, cooking tofu, it's just like a spring. I mean, if you squish on soft tofu, then it's squishy, and firm tofu isn't so squishy. So you're just like measuring the spring constant of a spring. And in fact, right, the way I think of a steak, this is sort of a joke, but it's not totally wrong, is that, a steak basically is just a network of springs. And I don't know, if you imagine it as a network of springs, the most important parameter in the network of springs is the bond length, the length between the springs, because they're little springs, you can't see them. This is a cartoon's thing. And so anyway, in honor of that, the equation of the week this week is the following. It's this number E, which scientists call the elastic modulus, which measures how squishy something is, and it's equal to some energy over L cubed, where L is the bond length. So you all have to clap. Because that's the equation of the week. And the amazing thing about this equation is that it can be used to think about the elasticity in foods as diverse as steak, tofu, pasta, pretty much anything, cake, whatever you'd like. And what changes, the reason that things are more or less elastic is there are really only two options. You either increase U, which is how strong the bonds are, or you decrease L, which is how small the springs are. And those are the two options you've got. And so at least when I listen to Mark, when I'm about to listen to Mark, what I'm going to be thinking to myself, among other things, is, how is he controlling U? How is he controlling the bond strengths? How is he controlling the distance between the bonds? And that's really the issue. Now, this is a picture of the food truck. This is Pasta Flyer. Of course, this story is going to be about gluten. I'm not going to say anything about this other than to say that gluten basically makes a network, which basically gives pasta and bread and things like that its elasticity. And the L that basically that happens there is essentially the distance between the cross links of the gluten molecules. And Mark, I think today, at least among other things, is going to tell us how one can make baked goods, or in this case pasta, which feel the same way in your mouth but have no gluten, which is really an amazing thing. So I think with that, I'll stop, and let's clap, because you're done with me, and now you get to listen to Mark.
Hello, good evening. How are you? Very excited to be here. I'd like to thank David and Pia for their warm hospitality. They let me mess around in the food science labs yesterday, and I didn't cause too much trouble. So I'm here to discuss certainly elasticity, but more specifically, how it relates to plasticity and how we are able to produce this elusive texture referred to as al dente, which is somewhere in the middle. First, I'd like to introduce my distinguished colleague, Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos is the pasta master at Del Posto, and he was kind enough to come here and lend his gentle touch. So we're going to do a couple of experiments. So I just wanted to clarify a couple things. Al dente is a toothsome firmness that gives way to a rewarding chew. It's firm, but it's also chewy. So it's plastic, and it's also elastic. The kind of stuff we're going to talk about today is my favorite, which is dry pasta, which, contrary to popular belief, for the most part, is the pasta we refer to when we throw around terms like al dente. I'm not sure if it's possible to make fresh pasta al dente. You can make it all sorts of different textures, but al dente, I don't believe, is one of them, unless you dry it partially. So plastic is basically the state that this pasta is in right now. So it's a fragile snap produced in the pasta from the drying technique, which we're going to get into a little later. And then the elasticity, is the stretchy pull produced by the rehydration of the dried product. So this is my mom. I believe she's with Rick Ocasek, very popular Bostonian from the 80s. I actually grew up in the town next door, Belmont, Massachusetts, and thank you very much. I spent many of my formative years running around causing trouble in Harvard Square, as a matter of fact. So my first employment was, in fact, in Harvard Square. I worked at a pizzeria right on Church Street, which is that way, in the Atrium building, which in the 80s was quite popular. It was a sort of California-style wood-burning oven. But there was also a quick service pasta concept that was commissary-driven, which is very similar to what I'm trying to do with pasta flour. I guess my first introduction to the texture, the very rewarding texture of al dente, was introduced to me through the salad bar. There was a restaurant on 33 Dunster Street, which is in the basement, and they had a very famous salad bar. It was called 33 Dunster. And I was a big fan. So the thing about the chickpea, which sort of led me to this quick service pasta, is that no matter where you go, no matter where you buy it, a chickpea in a can is always perfect. I don't know why. It's like the most elusive thing. How they manage to do that, like all around the world, no matter the brand, no matter the deli or whatever, and no matter the chickpea, you open one can and every one seems to be about the same. So it has a distinct plasticity that then sort of gives way to this really satisfying chewiness that's not quite al dente in the pasta context, but people do often refer to the texture of a properly cooked legume also as al dente. So that was sort of my first frame of reference there. At Del Posto, which is the restaurant where I'm the chef in Manhattan, I've been working for the last 10 years, almost 10 years, and it's a fine dining Italian restaurant that focuses not only, but very much on pasta, which is my first love and joy. And Carlos and I work very closely together trying to come up with interesting textures for pasta. Pasta, for the most part, until very recently, was exclusively made from wheat. And wheat is something that's certainly been around forever. You know, Mesopotamia and the cradle of life and all that. So wheat is essentially just a wild grass. And throughout time, it's always been an important staple of civilization. At many points, it was also considered to be currency. From what I understand, the Roman legions at a point were actually paid with faro or emmer, which was the second type of cultivated wheat. So at this point, wheat has been cultivated and produced into everything from food to booze to fuel. In the world today, rice would be the number one produced grain, followed by corn, primarily because of animal feed, and then wheat being the third most produced grain in the world. The thing that's interesting about wheat and the way that we've manipulated it over time, over several millennia, is that the wheat kernel has three parts to it. It has the endosperm, which is the majority of its size, and then the bran and the germ, which has all the vitamins, all the minerals, and all the protein. So the endosperm is primarily only starches. So in our culture today, most refined white wheat, or anything short of semolina, so baking flour, cake flour, 00 flour, all-purpose flour, is all just endosperm. So it doesn't really have any nutritional component at all, which is unfortunate and kind of strange. There's been a lot of talk recently about gluten-free and celiac disease, which is actually not an allergy. It's an immune deficiency disease that causes people to be unable to digest the gliadin in gluten. So we're going to talk about flour and the magic of combining it with water, which seems so strange that these two completely different and dissimilar and in no way related products produce this magical bond that can be formed and manipulated into so many different shapes and figures. Going back thousands of years, people were baking water and flour of some sort on a hot rock. It was probably closer to something like clay or paper mache, not something you would really want to eat. Also, it had very little pliability and certainly not very appetizing. The other interesting thing about wheat is that primarily we are cultivating only 6 types of wheat. And the majority are a red or amber-colored wheat that is quite high in protein. But then again, we strip away most of that protein from the kernel. So high-protein flour being semolina or durum wheat, so it's a durum wheat kernel that we're cultivating, is high in protein because it has the bran and the germ, but it's very, very low in gluten, so it doesn't bond well. That's often used in pasta for these dry shapes and also for fresh shapes like an orecchiette or a cavatelli, things like that that have a very nice texture, although I wouldn't necessarily call it al dente. Soft wheat, which is 00 flour, which is, again, just the endosperm, is often used for fresh pasta to lend more of a pliability, more silkiness. It also allows it to stretch so that, for example, with a stuffed pasta, you can pull it over the stuffing, which is quite helpful. We also sometimes use eggs, which is really just another way of introducing water to the recipe. So this is really interesting. In the 17th century, in Naples, that was the first time when sort of the working class finally had access to pasta as a main part of their diet. They could actually afford to eat it. Distribution channels had become sophisticated enough where they could actually get it to from places like Sicily to places like Naples. I have actually taken that ferry, and it is scary. Invention of the mechanized press is what allowed people to finally be able to enjoy fresh, dried pasta as a staple. At that point, most of the aristocracy that was enjoying pasta, even in further north in Germany and Austria, was often consuming it as more of a side dish, certainly with a much larger portion of protein. Whereas in the south, particularly south of Rome, around the time when Garibaldi started to unify the peninsula of Italy, people from the north were often referring to the people from the south as pasta eaters. So it was a derogatory term at the time. But the thing that's really interesting is at that point, we started to see this really, really interesting process, which was sort of the first part of the industrialization of this sort of pasta, where there was a pre-drying and a post-drying. When it's extruded here, so this is a hopper. So we're going to put the dry ingredients and water in here. You spin it around a bit. You heat up this extrusion chamber, ideally to less than 125 degrees, but not much less. And you'll see that it starts to coalesce, and the process of extruding it through torque and pressure and heat will push out a shape like this. And then what they do is they will start, at that point, it's extruded at about, so this is a semolina fusilli, and then this, this is what we're using on the truck. So this is a brand that I'm quite fond of right now. It's called Bio Nature. It's from Lucca. And this is produced from rice, which is the most common gluten-free pasta grain. Also potato and soy, which is somewhat unfortunate because when you deal with allergens, soy has become something that people are intolerant to. And also potato is a nightshade, so certain individuals prefer not to consume that. So it's coming out of here at about 31% water. And you want to dry it to be shelf-stable like this to about 12.5%. So what they do is they do it in two stages. In the first stage, they bring it from 31 to somewhere between 18 and 22%. And this is called the pre-drying. And they do it at a much higher temperature, often over 150 degrees. And the main purpose of that is simply to create a barrier on just the very exterior of the extrusion so that the shapes don't stick together. So especially in industrial production, they're producing so many of these little guys. And I do it on such a small level. In fact, in the lab yesterday, I spent a good portion of the morning today trying to separate them from one another. So you can understand the advantage of this technique. After that, they'll dry it for a much longer period of time at a much lower temperature until it gets to the 12.5%. And now this is shelf stable for sort of an infinite amount of time, providing that it's not too humid or it gets wet or something like that. You very rarely see pasta that's dry like this with egg, although sometimes I'm sure you've seen, sometimes there's like fettuccine, for example, that comes in these little nests and is dried. It's often used in other parts of Europe for beef stroganoff, for example. So they're more like buttered noodles. Those often have egg, and I rediscovered them recently, and they are very nice. I've become a fan recently. They cook really fast. They rarely stick together, which is a huge advantage and one of my pet peeves. Often if you buy string pasta that's wider, it will, like a fettuccine, for example, in a box, it's pretty much guaranteed to stick to each other. And that is very frustrating because then it won't cook evenly. That's one of the reasons why they create pasta like this with these shapes and ridges, or what they refer to as rigate, which is ridges on the outside. They'll often sell it with the advantage that sauce sticks to it better because of the grooves, which may or may not be true. But the truth of the matter is that they're less likely to stick to each other. So again, the advantage of egg is that you can create something that's much more pliable, much more elastic. And what you're essentially doing is using the egg, the protein and the fat, but also the water in the egg as an alternative source to help make the dough or the batter. Two things that Carlos is going to demonstrate here is that we have a couple different types of flour. So Carlos really likes to use warmer water, not hot, but generally around 85 degrees. We learned this also from pizza making because you want to bloom the yeast if you use especially dry active yeast, which is another excellent example of elasticity. But you don't want to kill the yeast. So 85 is a pretty normal temperature. With fresh pasta, you want the strength and the bite from the durum and semolina, but you need the 00 flour for higher protein, but also for better elasticity. So he's going to make a mixture of 3 flours in this particular case. The other flour that we like to use is this amazing invention invented by Thomas Keller and his food scientist, Lena Kwok, and it's called Cup for Cup. And the advantage to this specific flour, although there are others maybe similar to it, like it on the market, this one, the main advantage, particularly for home cooks, is that it really suggests that you can substitute 1 cup of this for 1 cup of any other flour that you would use in your normal baking or home recipes, which is amazing because who of us has time to, reimagine recipes at home? Although there's 3 separate flours here that Carlos is using, they're all essentially the same thing. Some of them have more endosperm, some of them have more bran and germ, but they're all from red winter durum wheat. Whereas this is white rice, brown rice, tapioca, potato, milk powder, xanthan that's derived from both corn and soy. So there's a lot of other ingredients in this. The main point that I'm trying to suggest is that wheat flour is magic because this one thing is, this is still just a facsimile trying to mimic that. And there needs to be, 8 or 9 ingredients to get it done. This is an experiment that we made yesterday in the lab. So this is, you can start. You want to get some water? We have some water in the back. He's bringing it? Okay, great. So the thing that's interesting about these two doughs is that Carlos is, do you want some more space? Yeah. Carlos is actually going to make the gluten dough first, which actually comes together as a ball. Whereas the gluten-free dough is the cup for cup plus water, is much more granular, and it doesn't actually become cohesive until it starts to go through the extrusion chamber. Feel free to go. So this is the experiment we did yesterday. So this is cup for cup and water. And the thing that's interesting is that although they look completely different, they're exactly the same. And the only difference between these two is that this was air dried and this was cooked and then air dried. This, and we'll pass these cups around for you, is exactly the same. The thing that's interesting about this is that this is completely, it's shelf stable, but it's not very strong and it's not very good for transport. Whereas this is shelf stable, but also what we're suggesting here today is that this can be made al dente and it's gluten-free, and this cannot. This remains plastic, and we haven't figured out how to cross over to sort of more of that elastic texture that produces the al dente that we're looking for. This is made from the cup for cup flour. They both are. The other thing that's interesting is, I looked into buying one of these pasta dryers, which allegedly are quite different from a dehydrator. This machine costs $20,000 minimum, and you have to dry a minimum of a couple 100 pounds of pasta at a time, which I just don't have any use for. I would like to one day. If you keep going to pasta flour truck, I might actually need to do that one day, but probably not for a while. So there's these 2 types of drying. One is that it pulls the moisture from the product, which then circulates the product as moist air. And then a dehydrator just pulls the moisture from the product and then it dissipates into the air. So it doesn't produce as consistently dry a product. If you look at this really closely, when we pass it around, you'll see there's a lot of stress on the surface of the pasta, although it's perfectly safe, and it's not like this, which was done by a professional. Some say, and Professor Brenner, I think you'll appreciate this, I read some stuff yesterday, as a matter of fact, for the first time, that some claim that the salt is the trick that pushes it from plastic to elastic, and it can't be done without salt, which I don't know. I mean, I salt pasta, whenever I cook pasta, I salt it saltier than seawater. The sort of prescribed ratio of salting water is 1 liter of water equals 100 grams of pasta, which is the international sophisticated serving size if you're eating something other than just pasta, equal to 10 grams of salt. So 10 grams of salt to 1 liter of water produces enough salinity that you can flavor your pasta.
So this is in the pasta that's cooked. It's not in the dough.
It's in the water.
It's in the water.
Yeah. So I salt much, much higher than that, as much as 15% of the water, which is saltier than seawater. The danger being that you can then not drag any of that cooking liquid into your saucepan, especially if it's in combination with, for example, rendered cured pork product or really salty aged cheeses, specifically sheep's milk, which tends to be a lot saltier and leaner than Parmigiano Reggiano, which is fatter because it's cow's milk. And, but it lends a really nice emulsifying characteristic to sauces. So that was sort of unusual. I didn't know that. Oh, wow. So check this out. So we often rest this. The main advantage, I would say, to resting this right now is that because it's really tight, it's going to heat this stem past 125 too soon. So I think we should rest this, and you can go on the cup for cup, and then we'll try to extrude that first. So when you see Carlos mix this recipe, it's, I'll grab that. It requires a certain touch, and Carlos is incredibly nimble. You wouldn't know necessarily from looking at him, but he has a touch like it's very rarely found, where he can be both forceful and gentle simultaneously, which is it's a crucial skill. It's a crucial skill. Yeah, exactly. You got to go through me. He's got a full card. Oh, that's the truck. Those are some of my very kind sponsors that helped us get to Harvard. Breville, which makes this lovely microwave, and Dietary, which is this incredible pasta that you should really try. You can buy it even at Whole Foods, and it's incredibly resilient, which is one of the reasons I like it so much. Like, you can cook it and then you can hold it, and it doesn't carry over. So you can actually suspend al dente, which has always been a really difficult thing to do. Well, that sort of elusive toothsomeness that's halfway between, or somewhere between plasticity and elasticity, is where the pasta is fully cooked. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. If there is a pearl, or if there is like a spirit of that white part in the center of the pasta, that is not al dente, that is crunchy. And that's something else. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people, particularly Sicilians that I've known, really like that. They refer to it as il pacco or something, like right out of the package. So they only cook it for a couple of minutes. It's pretty cool. I happen to like really, really firm pasta, but it does need to be cooked all the way through. Just through, but all the way. If you can suspend that texture for more than a few minutes, you're onto something. You're onto something. Because I've actually had pasta, like these are bronze die, for example, that Carlos is extruding through, but more mass-produced pastas. This is sort of like middle of the road, although it's my favorite. Something like maybe Prince or Ronzoni, some of the American ones that don't have the same sort of appreciation for Italian authenticity will use either nylon or Teflon dye, which produce a smoother edge, but they last much longer, so you don't need to replace the die, which can become quite expensive when you're dealing with really large piece of equipment. So we've got this really strange, so there's a big difference between this and this, you know? This is kind of like cottage cheese, and this is really nice too. So we're not going to, this will definitely heat up the stem really quickly though. Often in more industrially produced extruders, they'll water cool these chambers so that they're not able to get very hot. They'll run them for days. No? Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I think it's amazing. I mean, the dough is crumbly, but the pasta doesn't look crumbly.
It is though, because it's been forced together, but it's pure will.
Can I see? Can I see?
Feel it.
Wow, but it's really.
But it just comes apart.
But it
doesn't
comes
have
apart.
any.
Look at this.
It doesn't have any stretch.
It's terrible.
But if you cook it immediately, it
tastes
gelatinizes and then it has pull.
Huh.
Yeah. But you have to cook it immediately.
Right.
Yeah.
This is why gluten is amazing.
I know, exactly. So the thing I wanted to talk about in reference to pasta flyer, but more importantly Del Posto, for quite some time, one of our primary challenges has been dietary restriction, which is a very sort of subjective thing. Some people clearly are allergic to things, and other people are intolerant to things, which can also be dangerous, and it's absolutely their prerogative to choose to put safe food in their body or what's safe for themselves. So it's made our jobs as chefs in the service and hospitality industry much, much more challenging. And this is something that's maybe happened in the last probably 5 years. So with dietary restriction, so celiac disease is a disease. It's not an allergy. Dietary restriction is something that's an intolerance that people prefer not to put things in their body that they don't respond well to, which is perfectly rational and logical. And then there's the fad, which is a dietary preference, which is very, subjective. And, but to me, as a food service provider, it doesn't matter. I really don't care. We take all intolerances and all dietary restrictions with the same level of seriousness. So that's how we started to develop our gluten-free pasta. So currently at Del Posto, every single pasta on our pasta menu, I believe there's maybe 12 or 13. We also have an identical gluten-free version that's available to anyone at any time. So one of the challenges we ran into is that because we're such a large restaurant, we often do large tables, so 8 and 10 tops. Just by the law of averages, it's more likely there's going to be people at this table that are unable to eat certain things. So we've sort of designed it into the menu where we are able to offer them a gluten-free pasta that's exactly the same at the exact same time in a seamless way that allows them to enjoy the same level of service and hospitality as everyone else. Yes?
How do you deal with the challenge of cross-contamination?
We use all different equipment, everything, different water, different utensils, different all the equipment. We're not a medical facility, and we're not gluten-free certified, but I mean, a lot of celiac people suffering from celiac disease have eaten at Del Posto and haven't gotten sick yet. So. But I mean, today could be the day, Who knows? So that brought us to Pasta Flyer. My partner, Nastasia, suggested, and she was brilliant in her deductive reasoning, when you're trying to do something in a really, really small footprint and you're trying to make safe food for people, it's impossible to have, a 100 square foot kitchen and produce gluten and gluten-free food and expect it not to be cross-contaminated. So we chose to put all of our effort into trying to create the absolute best gluten-free pasta, to the point where hopefully no one would notice. We haven't quite achieved that yet, but we're getting there, right, Carlos? So that's our goal, is to produce something that people won't necessarily notice. Fortunately, most of our competition is really bad. So we feel like we have a good opportunity to get a little bit of the market share. Places like Olive Garden or Sparrow or Familia, they don't really approach food production with the same level of standards that maybe I would. Ask any of my former cooks and sous chefs over here. They'll tell you, I'm a dick. Okay, so we're going to go over this this process really quickly before we finish. So, do you have more of the water? Okay. So we combine the flour with the water and put it into the hopper. We extrude it. We cook it immediately in heavily salted water. We then shock it in heavily salted ice water so that we don't lose any of the salinity that we just put in it. And then we dry it in a dehydrator at around 140 degrees. It's just a home version. It's very crude, but it's effective, at least when you're making quantities like this. All right, here we go. So this is the one that has not been pre-cooked. So we're going to put it on, just to be safe so you can see the process. We're going to put it on for 2 minutes. Sometimes it can only take a minute, but because this bowl is pretty large and also the water wasn't that hot, it will take a little bit longer. If it's boiling, it will take 1 minute. If it's room temperature or tap water, it can sometimes take over 2. Also, if you put more than one vessel in, you have to add around 30 seconds for each additional vessel. So the microwave oven is a very misunderstood piece of equipment. I'm suggesting that it can make gluten-free pasta al dente, but that you can't make gluten pasta taste very good at all. And I don't know why that is, but that's one of the other advantages to pasta flour being gluten-free. So see, it's starting to go here. Put it on the thing. But there's some action in there. It almost looks like a sponge. It looks like yeast. However, this pasta is not changing. It's still only plastic. So that means when you bite it, it will have a fragile, sort of crumbly, pasty texture. So I usually let it sit for about 2 minutes. And it's actually soaking up some of this water, so that's improving the yield and rehydrating it.
Is it done, Mark?
I don't know. You can be the judge.
So I don't know if any of you believe this. I mean, why should cooking pasta in the microwave
So see,
be
look
different?
at that. Look at how gluey that
Can you
is.
see it?
See how much goo is on this? But it's not. I mean, it looks like tapioca. So it's cooked. Kind of tastes like oatmeal. So now we're going to try this one. See if it's any better. Oh, God, I hope this works. Is this hot? So one thing for sure is I'm going to try to make the seal stronger. Also, it's strange. Plastic wrap, saran wrap that you buy in a grocery store is completely different from the stuff that we use in restaurants, and I'm not sure why that is. We're never going to get this off. All right, so now we're in business. So this is going to create a nice seal here because we made sure to use a lot of plastic wrap. All right, now we have something that looks like pasta. Maybe one more minute. But yeah, there's like bubbles. It's doing stuff. But it's just flour and water.
If you don't cover it with plastic wrap, it doesn't work?
I have these like silicone mats
Yeah.
that do the same thing.
Yeah. But if you don't cover it, it doesn't work?
Not as well. This will be chewy.
Right.
This is just a mess. I don't know what this is. When we first started, I've been working on this project for about a little more than 3 years. So in the beginning, we thought it was going to be so great. We thought we were going to freeze dry it and make it like a packing peanut and then just rehydrate it in like tap water or something, right? Like space astronaut food. So we took a pasta like this and we went to the store in like the Berkshires. It was in Great Barrington. And they specialized in organic pet food. And it was this huge facility, maybe 5,000 square feet, and they had this big, giant, freeze dryer, one of the very, very few in the Northeast, and certainly the only one that would let a knucklehead like me in. And so we cooked it, we overcooked it, we froze dry it. We came by like a week later. We took a 10-minute pasta drop, turned it into a 15-minute pasta drop. Because freeze dry goes all the way to 0 water. 0. So back to the drawing board, right? What else did we try? All right, so now we have something that really looks like pasta. Want to try? Seriously. Doesn't have enough salt, but
Pasta.
it's not al dente, though.
For me, it is. I'm not a sophisticated cook. I mean, it's good. There's no gluten.
No gluten.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
So
Seriously. Seriously, it's just amazing. And that's with that flour over there.
These are the same. This is exactly the same pasta.
Huh. Yeah,
Exactly
that
the
looks
same.
terrible.
Well, the thing is that also once this was cooked, so you basically rinsed off half of that goo.
Right.
So this has a really nice texture, but it's not al dente. But I think a lot of people would still
good.
find it like appetizing.
No, I think that's good.
So, try it at home. It's safe. It's not expensive.